Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in American history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing to which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the winter of 1943, as war raged across Europe, a quiet tragedy was unfolding behind the fences of Camp Meadowbrook, a prisoner of war facility nestled in the dense forests of northern Michigan. Official records stated that 40 German prisoners arrived that December. By spring, 31 men had been reduced to shells of their former selves. Distant eyes, incoherent speech, and behaviors so disturbing that military physicians created an entirely new classification for their condition. Only 9 emerged with their minds intact. The official explanation blamed harsh winter conditions and isolation, but weather doesn't fracture a man's psyche so completely that he can no longer recognize his own reflection. This is the true account of what happened at Camp Meadowbrook, a story the government buried for decades until a chance discovery in 1968 finally revealed the macabre secret that lay behind those fences. It began with a simple transfer order. The prisoners captured in North Africa were being moved from an overcrowded facility in Texas to the newly constructed Camp Meadowbrook. The camp sat on the edge of the Kiowa National Forest, surrounded by miles of pine trees and isolated from the nearest town of Whitefish by 15 miles of unpaved road built to house up to 100 prisoners. The camp consisted of 4 barracks, a mess hall, infirmary, administrative building, and guard quarters, all encircled by 2 layers of chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Watchtowers stood at each corner, though records indicate they were often understaffed due to personnel shortages. According to transport manifests, the prisoners arrived on December 12, 1943. Temperature records from nearby Sault Ste. Marie show it was -5 degrees that day, with snow already 2 ft deep in the forest. The commanding officer, Major William Hargrove, noted in his log that the prisoners seemed in good spirits despite the cold and were grateful for the hot meal provided upon arrival. This would be the last positive entry in Hargrove's log. 3 days later he wrote, "Prisoner Hinrich Volker found staring at the perimeter fence for 4 hours. When approached by guards, he claimed someone was watching from the trees. Forest inspection revealed no tracks or evidence of intruders." By December 20th, similar incidents had been reported involving 5 more prisoners. Major Hargrove requested additional perimeter patrols, believing the men might be planning an escape. Nothing was found. No footprints in the snow, no disturbances in the fence. Just the endless white of winter and the dark silhouettes of pine trees standing like sentinels around the camp. The first real indication that something was wrong came on Christmas Eve. The camp's physician, Dr. Thomas Lawson, documented a disturbing increase in insomnia among the prisoners. Over half reported hearing voices or whispering coming from the woods at night. Dr. Lawson initially diagnosed it as a mass stress reaction, not uncommon among prisoners of war. He prescribed mild sedatives and recommended additional blankets to guard against the cold, but it wasn't the cold that was getting to them. On December 26th, prisoner Vera Miller was found unconscious in the shower facility. His fingernails were broken and bloody from apparently clawing at the tile walls. When he regained consciousness, he spoke incessantly about the visitors who came into the barracks at night. According to Dr. Lawson's notes, Miller insisted these entities were slipping through the walls and standing over the beds. 3 other prisoners corroborated Miller's account, though they refused to provide details, reportedly fearing that speaking of them makes them stronger. By New Year's Day 1944, the situation had deteriorated significantly. 17 prisoners were now exhibiting symptoms of extreme paranoia. They refused to sleep in their bunks, instead huddling together in the center of the barracks. They took turns watching the walls. Some had started carving small symbols into their beds, protective sigils. According to the camp's translator, Major Hargrove, growing increasingly concerned, requested a psychiatric specialist be sent from the military hospital in Detroit. His request was denied due to wartime personnel limitations. On January 3rd, the first tragic incident occurred. Anton Weiss was found deceased in the washroom. No note was left. His bunkmates reported that Weiss had stopped speaking 2 days earlier after claiming to have seen someone wearing his face standing outside the barracks window. The official report attributed his passing to combat stress and depression. 3 more prisoners experienced serious incidents in the following week. 2 did not survive. Major Hargrove implemented 24-hour monitoring and removed all potentially dangerous materials from the barracks. In his January 10th report to his superiors, he wrote, "Something is happening in this camp that defies explanation. The men are terrified of the barracks at night. They speak of visitors or watchers. Some now refuse to look in mirrors or reflective surfaces. Request immediate transfer of all prisoners to another facility." His request was denied. A peculiar note appears in Dr. Lawson's medical log from January 15th. He had begun interviewing the 9 prisoners who showed no signs of the spreading psychological disturbance. All 9, he noted, had something in common. They had chosen bunks along the southern wall of the barracks. The affected prisoners were primarily those who slept along the northern wall, the side facing the deepest part of the forest. When Dr. Lawson attempted to relocate some affected prisoners to the southern bunks, they became hysterical, claiming they are already waiting there. By the end of January, conditions had become untenable. 25 prisoners were now showing severe psychological symptoms. They spoke of the visitors who came from the trees. They carved symbols into their skin. Some stopped speaking altogether. Others wouldn't stop screaming. Dr. Lawson, overwhelmed by the situation, began administering heavy doses of sedatives just to maintain order. The camp's records reveal a disturbing pattern that developed during this period. Guards reported that the affected prisoners would often be found standing motionless, facing the northern wall of their barracks for hours at a time. When questioned, they either could not or would not explain their behavior. Several guards noted in their reports that the prisoners seemed to be listening to something that no one else could hear. One guard, Sergeant Frank Pearson, wrote in his personal journal, later discovered among his possessions after his passing in 1962, that he had begun to experience similar phenomena. "I have started hearing it too," he wrote on January 22nd. "A faint whispering that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It's most noticeable during the night shift, especially between 2 and 4 a.m. The words are indistinct, but the tone feels inviting, like someone calling you to come closer. I've caught myself walking toward the forest edge several times without consciously deciding to do so." Sergeant Pearson requested a transfer on January 25th. His request was granted, and he left Camp Meadowbrook on January 28th. His journal entries after leaving the camp indicate he continued to experience auditory hallucinations and insomnia for several months. Though these symptoms eventually subsided, he never returned to northern Michigan. On February 6th, during a particularly severe blizzard, the camp lost power. In the 18 hours it took to restore electricity, 4 more prisoners were lost to tragic circumstances, and 6 others suffered what Dr. Lawson termed complete psychological breaks from reality. When the lights finally came back on, guards found messages scratched into walls, floors, and even the skin of the affected prisoners. According to the translator's notes, they all conveyed variations of the same message. They come through the walls when darkness falls. One of the most disturbing accounts from this period comes from Private George Collins, who was stationed at one of the guard towers during the blackout. Due to the blizzard conditions, visibility was near zero, and the guards had been instructed to maintain their posts, but to focus primarily on keeping warm until conditions improved. In his report, filed on February 3rd, Collins described hearing movement in the compound below, despite the howling wind and driving snow. "I shined my flashlight down," he wrote, "but the beam couldn't penetrate more than a few feet in the blizzard." The movement continued. "It sounded like multiple individuals walking through the snow, but with an odd shuffling gait. I called out the standard challenge, but received no response. I fired a warning shot and the movement stopped momentarily, then continued, now moving away from the tower and toward the barracks. I radioed for backup, but due to the storm, no additional personnel could be deployed. When I described what I was hearing, the officer on duty suggested it was likely just the wind or falling snow from the trees. But I know the difference between natural sounds and footsteps. Something was moving out there in the dark." Many somethings. Private Collins requested a transfer the following day. Unlike Sergeant Pearson, his request was denied. He remained at Camp Meadowbrook until its evacuation on February 11th. After his discharge from the military in 1946, Collins suffered from severe PTSD and alcoholism. He passed away in 1957 at the age of 36, reportedly from liver failure. Military authorities finally responded to the crisis. On February 10th, a team led by Colonel James Barrett arrived to encountered in cases of war neurosis or combat fatigue, she wrote. They exhibit a unique constellation of symptoms that include profound dissociative states, persistent visual and auditory hallucinations, extreme paranoia, and what can only be described as a form of identity disturbance. Most disturbing is their consistent report of entities they variously describe as visitors, watchers, like or not quite human, that they claim can move through solid objects and take on the appearance of familiar individuals. Dr. Warren interviewed each of the 9 unaffected prisoners separately. In her notes, she expressed puzzlement at their apparent immunity to what she tentatively diagnosed as a contagious psychotic disorder. These men acknowledge awareness of the phenomena described by their affected comrades, she wrote, but claim to have found ways to protect themselves. When pressed for details, they become evasive. One prisoner told me, "It is better you do not know." Knowledge attracts their attention. Another said, "If I tell you how to fight them, you will begin to see them. And once they know you can see them, they never stop watching." Colonel Barrett immediately ordered the evacuation of all prisoners to a military hospital in Detroit. The 9 unaffected men were later transferred to a P camp in Pennsylvania, where they reportedly served out the remainder of the war without incident. The 18 affected prisoners were held in psychiatric care. According to fragmentary records, none ever recovered. They were eventually transferred to various mental institutions after the war. Their conditions listed as permanent and untreatable psychological disorder of unknown origin. What the official reports don't mention is that several members of Barrett's team began experiencing symptoms similar to those of the prisoners within days of arriving at Camp Meadowbrook. According to Dr. Warren's private correspondence later discovered, among her papers, after her passing in 1978, 2 military policemen who had assisted in the evacuation reported hearing, whispering, voices and experiencing vivid nightmares in which they were watched by figures standing motionless at the foot of their beds. Both men were placed on medical leave and eventually discharged from service with psychiatric diagnosis. Dr. Warren herself noted changes in her sleep patterns and mentals. State after leaving Camp Meadowbrook, "I find myself avoiding mirrors," she wrote in a letter to a colleague dated March 1944. "I know this is irrational, yet I cannot shake the fear that what I might see looking back at me would not be my own reflection. More disturbing are the periods, brief but increasing in frequency, when I feel as if I am observing my own actions from a distance, as if someone else is controlling my body while I watch. I have told no one of these experiences for fear of being relieved of my duties, but I confess I am afraid of what may be happening to my mind." Dr. Warren continued her psychiatric practice after the war, but specialized in less traumatic cases, focusing primarily on adjustment disorders and mild depression. She never published any findings related to Camp Meadowbrook, and reportedly refused to discuss the case, even with close colleagues. Her personal papers, including her correspondence about the camp, were only discovered after her passing when her daughter was sorting through her belongings. Camp Meadowbrook was abandoned after the evacuation. Military police cordoned off the area, and all personnel who had served there were reassigned to distant posts. The official explanation given to inquiries from the Red Cross and other organizations was that the camp had been closed due to unsuitable conditions and extreme weather. The truth remained buried in classified files until 1968, when a government clerk named Richard Dennis discovered the Barrett Report while archiving old military documents. But the Barrett Report wasn't the only document Dennis found. Hidden among the official military records was a personal journal belonging to Dr. Thomas Lawson. What Lawson documented in those pages reveals a horror far beyond what the official report suggested. A horror that may explain why the military was so quick to abandon Camp Meadowbrook and bury its history. According to Lawson's journal, the problems at Camp Meadowbrook began before the German prisoners ever arrived. During construction in the summer of 1943, workers reported unusual occurrences. Tools disappearing only to appear in different locations, strange sounds coming from the forest, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. Several workers refused to stay on the site after dark. The project foreman dismissed these accounts as nerves and superstition, but he did note in his reports that the construction fell behind schedule due to an unusual rate of worker turnover and unexplained accidents. More disturbing were Lawson's notes about the land itself. He had apparently spoken with a local man from Whitefish who claimed the area where the camp was built had been considered unwelcoming by the native Ojibwe people. They called it the place of hollow voices and avoided it entirely. According to local legend, several logging operations in the late 1800s had been abandoned after workers began experiencing visions and unusual behavior. The man told Lawson that the last attempt to develop the area had been in 1912 when a hunting lodge was built near the same site. All 5 members of the hunting party that stayed there were found deceased or missing, with the sole survivor discovered wandering the forest, incoherent and distressed. The survivor reportedly spoke of people who weren't people coming out of the trees at night. Lawson's journal contains a transcript of an interview he conducted with this survivor, identified only as Mr. R, at a sanitarium in Marquette. The interview dated November 15, 1943, nearly a month before the prisoners arrived, suggests Lawson had concerns about the camp location before operations even began. Mr. R had been institutionalized since the 1912 incident, diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. He was 68 years old at the time of the interview and had not spoken coherently about the incident in decades. According to the sanitarium staff, Lawson noted that the man became agitated when he mentioned the location of Camp Meadowbrook. "They're still there," Mr. R reportedly said, waiting in the trees. "They look like men, but they're different inside. No souls, just hunger. They want what we have. They want to wear us like clothes." When Lawson asked what had happened to his companions at the hunting lodge, Mr. R became even more distressed. "They took them," he said, "changed them, wore them, walked around in them. I could tell. The eyes were wrong. The way they moved was wrong, like they were learning how to use the bodies." Lawson pressed for details, asking how Mr. R had escaped. "I didn't look at them," the old man whispered. "That's the secret. If you look directly at them, they know you can see them. And once they know that they come for you, I kept my eyes down. I pretended I couldn't see them even when they stood right in front of me, and I prayed. I prayed until my throat was raw. I think they don't like that. The praying, it affects them somehow." Lawson initially dismissed these stories as the ravings of a mentally ill man. But as the situation in the camp deteriorated, he began to wonder. On January 18th, he wrote, "I can no longer deny that something is happening here beyond rational explanation. Last night, while making my rounds, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the forest just beyond the fence. It appeared to be a man, but something about its proportions was unusual. Unusually tall, unusually thin. When I directed my flashlight toward it, it retreated into the trees, moving in a way that seemed unnatural. I've told Noonie. They would think I've succumbed to the same affliction affecting the prisoners." Lawson's entries became increasingly concerned as January progressed. He reported seeing the same figures multiple times, always at the edge of the forest, always at night. He began to experience the same insomnia that plagued the prisoners. On January 25th, he wrote, "I understand now why they fear mirrors. Today I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window of the infirmary. For a moment, just a moment, it didn't look quite right. The eyes seemed different, the mouth too wide. When I blinked, it was gone. Am I experiencing hallucinations? Or is there something in this place that can alter perceptions?" A particularly troubling entry from January 27th describes an encounter with a prisoner who had been one of the first to exhibit severe symptoms. "I found Krause staring at the wall again today," Lawson wrote. "When I approached him, he turned to look at me, and I nearly stepped back. His eyes were unusual, not just vacant or dilated, but somehow different, as if I was looking into something unfamiliar. He smiled at me, a strange, stretched expression that seemed unnatural, and said, 'We see you, Doctor. We see all of you now.' His voice had a strange quality, like multiple voices speaking in unison, but slightly out of sync. I administered a sedative immediately. He is currently restrained in the infirmary, but I confess I am afraid to check on him. I fear what I might find looking back at me from Krause's face." The most chilling entry came on February 1st, the night before the power failure. Lawson wrote, "They're getting closer. Every night they come nearer to the buildings. The prisoners know. They've known from the beginning. These things, whatever they are, were here long before us. They live in the spaces between the trees. They're drawn to us, or perhaps we do to them. I believe they feed on fear, on confusion, and now they've developed a taste for it. God help us if the lights go out." The power failed the very next night. Lawson's final entry, dated February 3rd, was nearly illegible, the handwriting